Welcome to a brand new episode of IDTALK for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah, and if this is your first time tuning into the podcast, we welcome you and we hope that you come back for future episodes and more incredible content. If you're a returning viewer or listener to the podcast, we welcome you back and we hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, insightful, and enlightening. So today's topic is all about dismantling white supremacy culture in our K-12 schools. So with all the conversation swirling around critical race theory and anti-racism in our national news and media and just globally, I wanted to bring somebody on who's been doing that work, who's been in the trenches doing it in his school and in other institutions. And he's a brother who I've been following for a minute, and I just am an admirer of his work. So it's an honor to have him come on to talk about the work he's doing at his middle school and just other institutions throughout the nation. So without further ado, I want to bring on a good brother, Mr. Joe Truss, to the show to talk with us.
Yo, what's up? How you doing? Pleasure to be here, brother.
Not bad. How you feeling?
Oh, man, okay, man. It's the weekend, As I was saying before, we started coming to you live from the kids' room, in this land of time of Zoom life. You got to be mobile and nimble. Sometimes you're working in the kids' room.
That's what we have to do, man. But like I said, it's an honor to have you. You're definitely a brother who I always follow, out on these streets, just with everything that you're doing at your school, all the work you're doing in the Bay Area and beyond. So just wanted to give you that salute, before we get in.
I appreciate it. Much appreciated, and for me, there's lots of folks I've learned from and many mistakes I made. I don't think we always see the mistakes and the failures, but it's a road, and we all learn from each other and rest on the shoulder of giants, man.
Yes, sir. And we actually got some Boston ties. So I actually taught in Boston public schools for 5 years. My wife is a Boston native, and I know that you spent some time out in that area during your time at Tufts.
Yeah.
So we got that tie going.
Yeah, I was there for about a year. I knew going there, and while I was there, that I was going to be there for the hottest second, and I was back to Cali immediately.
I don't blame you. You don't want to deal with the snow. I don't blame you.
None of it.
All right. So I already mentioned, you're out in the Bay Area, San Francisco to be exact. So tell us about your upbringing and what ultimately brought you into education.
Yeah. So I grew up, actually, I'm a San Francisco city native, born and raised. If you know the area, the Tenderloin of San Francisco, which is, inner city, like a red light district. If you don't know the area, you could probably take any city you're familiar with and put east on it, and it's probably like that city. East Oakland, East St. Louis, East Palo Alto. And if you don't know any of those places, if you watch The Wire, it was very similar to Amsterdam. Although that looked fictitious, it's a lot of places to get down like that. Both the public housing piece of it and this idea of there are no rules in some places of the country, right? And there are people who are living and breathing and loving their life, but forgotten by society. And the neighborhood I grew up in was like that. So I grew up in the 80s, born in 81, so came up in the 80s. And in my neighborhood was one of the epicenters of drug dealing in San Francisco. And I think some of the stories I tell about my neighborhood is that there's neighborhoods where you live and you sell drugs in your own neighborhood. I understand that. This was a neighborhood where people from around the city and even across the bridge and other cities came to sell drugs there. And it was like this open space somehow that it was like a competitive territory, and everybody kind of had their block and their area, and they were vying for power and control, right? And trying to make a way out of no way. But that's the neighborhood I grew up in, right? And just gangs, violence, shootings, right? Prostitution, all of that. And in the backdrop, a lot of kids, a lot of families, a lot of kids, a lot of poor kids, a lot of immigrants. I grew up with a lot of East Asian and Southeast Asian and Central American immigrants, Cambodian, Laos, Vietnamese, folks from Mexico, El Salvador, because it is the cheapest place to live in San Francisco, right? So you get everything. So that's the upbringing, right? And for some reason, despite all of those things being available to me and all my friends getting wrapped up in everything, selling drugs and doing all kind of stuff from middle school on, I somehow didn't do that stuff. I don't know. It's hard to say why. I didn't necessarily get pushed, like I didn't really have a very strict mom. I'm my only child, grew up with just my mom. Dad died when I was young, to alcoholism. For some reason I just did school, and I mean, I understand I had a love for learning. I still do, but I was the anomaly in that particular neighborhood, right? I was one of the only kids who did school. So that kind of led me on this trajectory of school and education and, academia and all that kind of stuff, and being young and brown, right? And now I understand how the game is played. There were folks playing chess with me. Do you know what I mean? Like, right through this tokenization of what we do with the quote unquote winning horse in the race. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And, yes, I'm sure they loved me. I'm sure they thought I was a great student, all that kind of stuff. But I understand tokenization now, right? To be like, hey, Joe, you know what? You should apply to this program. But then you tell my homie who was dropping out of school that he should apply to that program, right? And we understand why that is. We're both kids of color. We were both poor, but there are limited resources. So we decide who we're going to bet on, right? So you name it, I was in the program, Park and Rec, YMCA, this, that, and other program from like Stanford or San Diego State or UC Berkeley, like all these little kid programs. I was in these little programs in the summer. So that just kind of kept me on track in school. But for the longest time, I thought I was going to be a doctor, and I think I tell this story a lot too, because I don't know, everyone's got different journeys that gets them into education. And for me, I was more pre-med than anybody, you know what I mean? Like practice MCAT, OChem, and studying late night for the midterms at Berkeley. You name it. I was in it, doing practice autopsies in the 10th grade, pre-med, right? And then right around second year of college, sophomore year, I started learning more, right, about my history, right? I started reflecting more, learning, understanding the socio-political context that we were in. And now I had these terms and this history and these words for what I was experiencing, right? I understood now systemic racism, systemic oppression, classism, right? Hegemony, right? I mean, these things that like I experienced, but now I was like, oh, okay, like this is a part of the game, right? And then at the same time, as I'm reading these things, I did this transformational summer program where it was an Afrocentric summer camp, more or less, called Leadership Excellence. And the program was called Oakland Freedom School. And the point of it was Black educators, but not teachers, right? Not credentialed teachers, right? Black educators, Black folks, Black children, Black studies. That's it. No other rules. And that's what it was. And it had been around for, I think, 10 years before I got involved with them. And I saw what we could do. You know what I mean? I was still young, so I'm really just learning and soaking it all up. But I saw what we could do when it was just us teaching us what we need to know, right? And that's when I learned more about the Panthers. That's what I learned about more about the civil rights movement from the people, though, not necessarily from the books or from the university. And when I had that experience in the summer going into my junior year, I was like, oh, I can't do medicine. I can't. I was like, because I was definitely about social justice as I read and learned more, but I was like, I'm gonna be a doctor and I'm gonna do some social justice through medicine. When I did the program, I saw what you could do with young minds with the right stuff. That was it. And then I was like, I'm gonna be a teacher. everybody's like, what are you doing, Joe? Like, I'm in all these pre-med programs, and everybody's like, Joe, the money, the fame. Like, what are you doing? You got A's. Like, you really gonna do it? Like, why are you giving this up? And I was like, nah, that's not it. That's not gonna save the world. You know what I mean? Like, nah, we got to start earlier. We got to start with the young minds in the places where they are forgotten. So that led me into education, and I happened to have enough units in Spanish because I was a Spanish major to be a Spanish teacher, even though I wanted to be a math teacher. They were like, "Nah, you got to stay an extra year." I was like, "Nope, no, I don't." I was like, "I'm gonna go be a teacher." I was like, "Spanish? Okay, then we teach you Spanish." And that led me to be a Spanish teacher. So the point really was just, how can I get in the classroom to teach young folks what's the history that's being kept from them, right? To teach them how amazing and how beautiful they are, and to try to give them some of these skills to navigate this white power structure. And that's kind of what got me on this quest.
Right. And it's interesting how we go through this K-12 system and we experience all these different things happen, such as the racism, in some cases, the internalized racism, right? The anti-Blackness and everything else. But yet we don't have the language to articulate what's going on. And it's not until we get into this field and we start to see what's going on with our own students that we start to make the connections between what happened when we were going through the system and what they're going through right now. So I know for myself, when I came into the system, I very much had those internalized racist ideologies, but it was subconscious. Like, I didn't realize I was perpetuating it until you start to educate yourself and you start to, read more books, and you start to listen to, folks, who are in this work, who can pretty much break it down to where, all right, I need to make some changes. I need to reevaluate and reframe what it is that I'm doing in the classroom that's, disrupting my students. Yeah. So this is what brings me to the work that you're doing right now at your middle school, because I know that you've been doing a lot of work with your staff around dismantling white supremacy culture and really just get into the granular details of what that is. So I want you to just take this time to just share with us, what is white supremacy culture in your own words, but also how does it manifest in our K-12 schools? Because there's some folks who may be watching us today who may not know what it is that we're talking about.
Yeah, no doubt. So I think, my own words, the beauty of that is, like, you just really got to break down those 3 words, and that's it, right? That's kind of a self-explanatory piece, right? So one, we're talking about a culture, right, which is a way of being, right? And a culture is, right, a collection of beliefs, habits, right, actions, traditions, right, routines, right? And we understand white supremacy to be like this belief also that white folks are supreme to all other people, to all people of color, right? And if we're just going to look at the United States, and we're talking about white people in the United States, and people of color in the United States, right? But you could extend that to talk about international and Eurocentrism and all that kind of stuff. But we're talking about a way of being that says that white folks are superior, right? And a way of being, the other piece that yields and manifests and reinforces white supremacy, right? And as a result, a racial hierarchy, right? That positions and keeps white folks at the top. It puts folks of color at the bottom, whether or not they tell us that you moved up a ladder rung or not, or you in the middle or now you below. All that shit is a distraction, right? From, you got white people and you got other people. So it is that belief, right? That ways of being of white people are superior, right, to folks of color, right? The actions, the behaviors, right? The routines, right? And with that, the mindsets as well, right? So that's generally what white supremacy culture is. And the culture piece is critical, right? Because a white supremacist is a person, right? A KKK member is a person, right? We're talking about a culture. Now we're saying that people can possess, promote, and then really transmit, right? And keep alive this culture and its way of being. So that's something different that you pass on. We could pass on culture to our people, and folks of color pass on all kinds of cultures to their people. But we also pass on this white supremacy culture, right? Which is really just a derivative of white supremacy plus some capitalism, right? And plus some patriarchy for sure, right? There's the foundation of this nation, in the US at least. Now, when you talk about how does it show up, now then all you really have to ask yourself is, where do we see examples of it being clear that white folks are superior to other people? And white folks are the supreme ideal, right? And they are the model, right? When we ask ourselves that question, it's everywhere, right? We could just go down the line, right? You could look into curriculum to say, what curriculum are we looking at? Who's in the curriculum? Who's the model? Who's the example, right? Now we can understand this piece of like our examples of people, our highlighted folks throughout history are dead white men, right? When we land owning or rich white men, right? And then the message there is who's not being represented and who should we idolize, even though, our people, whether we're talking about Black people or Middle Eastern people or Mesoamerican people, we got science, we got history, right? We got architecture. So they exist. We're just not being shown that, being told that, right? So that's just representation, just the curriculum, right? If we're going to look at the pedagogy, then we're talking about how we're teaching and who are we teaching to? Are we teaching to the culture of folks of color, right? Internationally, as well as derivatives of the United States, of a collective way of being, of a communal way of being, right? And tapping into that communal spirit, or are we tapping into and promoting an individualism, right? Which is much more prevalent in Europe, really England, right? But you can get to some places in Europe, get into the backcountry where I bet they collectivists too. We just don't hear that, right? So that's around the pedagogy and the way of being, right? Who's talking, right? Where the knowledge lies, right? What's the dynamic between student and teacher? Then if we get into discipline, right? Discipline's all about rules, right? And what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do. Now, this question of who gets to set the ideal and the model of the model student, right? How you're supposed to show up, what quote unquote respect looks like, right? Whether or not we're supposed to yield to the person in power, right? Or not, right? And then we see what the response when you push back or you're outside of the norm, right? And that's discipline, that's punishment, right? It's interesting who gets punished, right? Disproportionately are folks of color, right? Because they are displaying different ways of being. And sometimes they're not with the program, right? They're not with this, they're not taking the medicine, right? They're not taking the construct that we're trying to like download into them, right? They're just like, no, I'm not with this. Why do I have to raise my hand to talk? Why can't I just get up and go to the bathroom when I go to the bathroom? Why can't I have a conversation when I want to just have a conversation? Why can't I talk about what I'm interested in, what happened yesterday versus what you want to talk about today, right? And our reaction to how our students show up, discipline system, punishment system. Now we see what it looks like for our Black and brown students and immigrant students, for that matter, to be over surveilled, right? To be over policed, right? And to therefore be pushed out of the classroom, right? I mean, you go on and on the testing system. What's the standards based on, right? So it's really just over and over and over again, we see that the model is white folks, and the goal is to yield white folks being supreme, with a little bit of tokenization along the way that folks want to give us some distraction of some progress.
Right. And I think when we talk about tokenism, I think about this idea of diversifying our teacher workforce, because you have so many school districts that talk about, well, we need to have more Black and brown educators in our districts. And it's easy to find people who serve as the poster people, for the districts. But in the end, do they have the mindsets, right? Do they have that decolonized mindset to where they're going to call out a lot of these white supremacist actions that do take place? Because I could tell you this, I came into the profession thinking that all these things you mentioned were totally normal, but it goes back to the conditioning that we all tend to go through in these teacher prep programs. So I'm wondering, when you first got into the school district, were there times looking back where you just thought, man, like, I really did that? Like,
oh, most definitely. Most definitely. I mean, and I think, yes. And I think we must start there, only because if we're all so holy, don't none of us have to change, right? And if we're all in denial, there's no problem, right? What I love about some of the stuff Dr. Ibram X. Kendi says, he talks about denial, right? He says denial is the heartbeat of racism, right?
yep.
So therefore, the answer is vulnerability and reflection, right? And acknowledgement, right? So we must start with acknowledging that we are racist. We've been racist, right? And it's a constant journey, a constant struggle to be anti-racist, right? So yes, right. Like I went through the same schools, right? So I understood how to play the game, right? And for the longest time, I thought, yeah, that's how you're supposed to play the game, right? That's how you're supposed to be, right? So when we talk about rigor, right, and what accomplishment and achievement really looks like, right? I achieved in those ways. I was rewarded for doing those things. So then, therefore, you're trained to be judgmental of the people who don't, right? Somebody told me I was gifted and talented at a young age. So what's that do with your mind? That fucks your mind up to say, well, I guess everybody else ain't gifted, right? I'm the only one that's gifted. And what is that based on? How fast you can write a fucking essay? Like, come on. Like, and as I've gotten older, you realize all the other talents and gifts that folks bring that are genius, right? Being able to connect with folks and actually read folks and empathize with folks and build collectives, that's genius, right? That's actually not a genius that I have easily. That's something I've had to work at, right? Whereas some people, they're like, you meet a person like they're building minutes, right, and bonded, right? Whether that's around movement and art and expression and creativity, right? That's genius, right? We just don't value that because that doesn't allow for the folks who've had power to win, right? So go back to your question, right? So as a teacher, yeah, when I got there, I was just like, oh, in the same way of white folks come to the hood to save kids of color. Now you get this mindset of like, all I got to do is be brown and maybe I'll do the same thing and I can convince them to do the same thing so that they can win and they can play the game. So we're doing the same bullshit rigor approach to education, right? So in the beginning, yes, right? Like I felt like I needed to have control and power in the classroom because that's how they train us. That's what we saw, right? We're trained that when people push back, you're supposed to remove the defiant one, right? You try to turn them. If you can't turn them, you remove them. That's power, right? We know that works in any situation, right? That happens in the classroom, right? So yes, for sure. Like I was trying to punish kids and talk down to kids. I was I was feeling like I had the answer, right? I got the curriculum. I'm here. I paid my dues, so you should respect me, right? And I'm Black and I grew up poor. It don't work like that though, right? Never will, right? So yes, definitely there. And even on the curriculum piece, like I was still standards focused in earlier parts of my practice. And then I started expanding and using more supplemental stuff. And I started realizing that the supplemental stuff was the stuff, right? That's the actual curriculum, right? So perfect example, in my Spanish class, I started off teaching Spanish, Latin American culture, right, which a lot of pieces I really love. But then I started getting into ancient indigenous practices and ancient cultures as well, right? With that ain't really in the book, right? The book is really, they want you to be on some Spain type shit when you're teaching Spanish, right? Because that's about power, because it's clear who's running shit, right? And you have to make sure we establish that. Later on in my practice, because I'm teaching Black kids in Oakland, I was like, you know what? I want to teach about the Blacks in Latin America. And I want to teach about the migration, the forced migration, and the transatlantic slave trade that led African folks to get to Latin America. Then I had my students making connections between their experience as Black people in Oakland and the Black folks, the African descendants in Peru, right? In Honduras, right? In Belize, right? in Nicaragua, right? And of course, Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic and Cuba, right? So them making those connections, like that ain't in the curriculum. I ain't seen no book that has that shit yet. But what did that do with my students? They was like, oh shit, we everywhere, right? And that's our culture, right? Not to mention, we'll go deeper for a second. I also love me some Ivan Van Sertima, right? Who studied Black folks, African folks, read the Americas before the Europeans, right? It's a whole book. It's called "The Came Before Columbus." He did a whole study on the ruins and the artifacts and the people of Mesoamerica, specifically Mexico, specifically the Olmec people, and has all of these studies on showing that Africans arrived in the Americas before these colonizers from Europe, and we see the effects of that, right? So showing my kids that, and then showing them the connection of the pyramids in Egypt or Kemet, and then the connection between that, right, and Tikal in Guatemala, right, or Tenochtitlan in Mexico, showing that, they're just like, for kids, right? And I'm like, I didn't get this as a kid. I had to learn about this as an adult. But you see what that does to a young mind in the 10th grade. They're just like, oh shit, this is it. You know what I mean? Like, and they know they weren't getting it, and they know they're not supposed to get it. You know what I'm talking about? That's the switch of like, now we're being responsive to who we're serving, right? And showing this as a liberation piece. And I'll tell you this, the question I had them answer as a Spanish teacher was, how can language be used for liberation, right? And what connections are you seeing across these spaces, right? So for them to see now ethnic studies, Black studies, Latin American studies in a Spanish class, right? But I mean, what else do you need? You know what I mean? Like, that's it. That's some college shit that you get to in an upper division course if you go deep enough, right? But our kids don't get there because they get bullshit along the way, and they don't think they're ever going to get that. You bring that to them early, they're like, okay, I like learning. I like this stuff. Like, okay, I see myself in this,
Right. But then also, even when you get to that stage, that college stage, you have to be intrinsically motivated to want to learn about that history. It's not just something that just comes to you. Like, you have to be around the right people and in the right environment to absorb all that history and all this sacred knowledge in order for you to be motivated to do that. But you mentioned about ethnic studies, and I know that in your home state of California, if I'm not mistaken, did Governor Newsom pretty much say like no to ethnic studies? Because I know that's something you all been pushing to do.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a struggle. So like, it was moving for a while, and then they got caught up with determining what should be included and what should not be included in it, and it just slowed it down. But what's the result? Slowed it down. Okay. And what's the result? It's not a mandate yet. So that's the part that matters to me. Yeah, but I mean, that's a state mandate. But and there's already places that are leading the way, right? So there's plenty going on in Los Angeles, plenty going on in San Diego, San Francisco, Oakland.
Right.
Folks are already doing ethnic studies, right? Because they found a way, right? They made it happen. They gave the people what they need. Like, example, in San Francisco, for like 20 some years, they have this Filipino program called the Filipino Education Program, where they've been teaching Filipino studies for 20 years, not even in the school district. Like, it's been a nonprofit for like 20 years, and they got a whole curriculum, whole bunch of stuff they push in, partner with schools just to bring Filipino kids their true story. And actually, it's stories of liberation and resistance too. But my point there is that we find a way, right, to give our people what we need. We just need to find a way to push that into the main curriculum, right? So that we're not always trying to push, you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's a struggle. That's always a struggle. But now I want to shift gears to what you're doing now at your middle school, Visitacion Middle School, right? And you've done a lot of great work there, especially with your staff. And I know that you all have been tackling this issue of white supremacy. And just from experience in my own schools, I know that work is not easy work to do, because you have to anticipate the white fragility. You have to anticipate even some of the internalized racism from your staff of color, who don't even recognize that racism is an issue, not just in the school, but just in our society as a whole. So I want to know, just through the process that you went through, because I know this spanned maybe a couple of years and it's still going on, right?
Mhm, mhm.
What were some of the lessons that you learned through this process of engaging this work with your staff? And as a result of this work, what are some noticeable changes that you've seen from your school community, if you've seen any?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll go to the second question first. I think with this kind of work that is we're talking about mindset shifts,
Yeah,
right? It takes years to see results for this, and we might not see it, right? Because we're up against decades of a different mindset and decades of programming, like we were just talking about. For us, as two folks of color, to be able to reflect on internalized racism, right? Um, that's different than white folks who haven't experienced it and weren't experiencing it in real time, and all of a sudden it's just like being dropped on, right? And the blinders are being taken off all of a sudden, right? And it's bright, right? And they don't want to look at the sun, right? Um, so the results, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if there are results quite yet, because ultimately the people are the people. You know what I mean? And each individual person gets to control their actions. And I think on a good day, um, we could do some anti-racist stuff, but on a bad day, we back to racism. By default, right? Especially when we get stressed, right? Especially when we get pressed. Um, Especially when we get challenged, right? So I think the results, I think it shifted how we interact some more. It shifted. Um, it's allowed for people to be less resistant, but it's hard because it's still a white dominant place, because it's still in a white dominant district, a white dominant state, a white dominant country. So this idea that we can easily make these oasis it's just false, right? I mean, it's constant work. That being said, people being more reflective, people asking more questions, people white people understanding they need to step back more, they need to check. But it's hard because that's a process too, right? Because like people go through this denial process or this defensiveness process of, even when they know they're not supposed to talk, then I'm just going to shut down, that's not going to say anything because I'm just always racist, right? So like there's a process they got to go through. I don't know how many years it's going to take them to get through that process, right? To realize like, oh, I just need to be uncomfortable and questioning myself but still engaged. How do I do that? It's going to take them fools years, everybody, right? um
yeah,
but it allowed us to make some connections around discipline to kind of take another pass at restorative justice. Whereas we tried in the beginning without the right construct and the right mindsets before, and it died off. It didn't work, right? But now when we can connect restorative justice to white supremacy culture, okay, now we talk about something, right? And when now, and we made some attempts at project-based learning before, right? But now when we can connect project learning, deep learning of white supremacy culture as an answer to or response to white supremacy culture, now we getting somewhere. Now we can understand why we're doing what we're doing. Um, Now, as far as some of the lessons I learned, one is that's the start, right? I should have started with that. I didn't necessarily have that framework. I had a framework of systemic racism, but I didn't necessarily have all these frameworks to start. I had some stuff that I was starting with, and it was okay to get it rolling. But I was just talking about this on a panel yesterday, that these frameworks that either we learn as people of color as we navigate this racist place,
yeah,
and or we read about at some point if we took those classes or somebody just put us onto this thing, right? White folks, they didn't get that. Do you know what I mean? The frameworks, right? These ways of being, these understandings, let alone the example of not doing that. We just talk about a framework, right? Just a framework of oppression versus liberation. Let's just say a simple framework like that. They haven't really been looking at things through those lenses for decades, let alone a couple of years. That
right.
I should have started with so much more learning, right? But the hard part is there's no need for doing the learning if it's not clear that something's broken in the beginning. And a lot of times we spend all this time beating around the bush, trying to like hint that something's broken, and let alone how broken it is, right? Because for us as folks of color, we understand how broken the system is with respect to race, right? And women understand how broken it is with respect to patriarchy, right? But we be hinting at it, dancing around it, tiptoeing around it, so that we can never really get at it. When I got to this piece of talking about white supremacy culture, that was it. Because then somebody they had to powerfully disagree and kind of say, you know what, either I don't agree, I don't think there's white supremacy culture, right? Which nobody did that too. They had to say, well, I'm with it. Like, I support the white supremacy culture, like, and at that point, when it's just like diversity or not diversity or whatever, like, I don't know, people can say whatever they want to say, but it's like, do you fundamentally believe that I'm beneath you though? Do you know what I mean? It was like, nah, I don't believe that. Maybe the people who did, they left and they didn't say anything. I don't know, but they gotta bust a move. They gotta make some decisions. So back to the lesson, it's the more explicit, the more honest we are, the more bold we are, then we can start doing something. Because the issue is, if I'm in my 6th year, finish my 6th year, right? If I spent 6 years trying to get to the place where we could talk about white supremacy culture, I never got to talk about what we're gonna do about it. We never did anything, right? Whereas at this point, we don't talk about it. Now we can talk about, are we doing white supremacy culture or not? And if not, what are we doing? And then how do we know, right? Because now it's already a conversation. It's a vocabulary word, right? Versus never getting there, right? So it's going early, starting early, being bolder, and being more authentic. It's hard because we've been trained and punished for doing that. You know what I mean? But I've seen that's the answer though.
But just from watching you from afar, you're an individual who, like, honestly, like, you could care less what people think, because if it's right, then that's what has to be done.
I'll tell you this though. This is what I've learned, right?
All right.
I'm only scratching the surface. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because the truth is, the things that we really think, you know what I mean? If we shared how we really felt, it's on a whole nother level, right?
Yeah,
and like,
right.
Which is why I appreciate that, which is why I understand just how caged we often are and how small we normally are playing and how inauthentic we are. Because in one regard, we've been trained to do that, right? But in the other regard, it's in the mind thinking that it's not even possible, right? But I agree. Like, I'm trying to get to the place where I care even less, because the truth is, it's that caring and that prioritizing of white comfort and male comfort and rich people's comfort that allows the power system to stay as it is, right? And as we get access to it, if we're worried about their comfort, then even our access to it don't even matter. We just keep the system as intact, right? And that's how they play us, right? Because it's like, hey, you staying, because if you disrupt this shit, out cold with the rest of them, that's a play on us, right? Versus the more we use our platform to push and our voice to push and the access, we sit at the table and all of a sudden they're used to having a certain conversation. We call them out and they're like, oh shit, we can't say that anymore. We can't talk about that anymore. Then it starts to change some stuff. We just need a lot more folks doing that so that they can't push us all out. Do you know what I mean?
No, yeah, for sure. And as you were talking about the learning process that your staff and even yourself has to go through to get to this destination, I'm pretty sure as you were going through this work, there were probably some staff members who maybe said, you know what, this probably isn't the right school for me to work in. Maybe I want to transfer to another school. Because, just think about it. In order to get to the place where you can start talking about what to do about it, there has to be continuity within your staff. You have to have people who embrace it, who are invested in the work, but also want to stick around to see it through. So I'm wondering if there's been some turnover as a result of the work that you've been doing with regard to dismantling white supremacy.
Yeah, I think so. It's hard. In a public school system,
Right.
it's a different game, right? For a few reasons. One, there's a lot of security for folks to stay wherever they want to stay, and to promote the status quo in a public system, right? Two, when folks who are agitators, right, and disruptors, we tend to disrupt and move on, right? And I say that being someone like literally like I'm in my last couple of days as the principal at the school, knowing that I'm moving on to some other stuff, right? I'm happy to be moving on to some stuff that I enjoy and I'm going to be doing, like doing this work full time. But my point is there are folks who will outlast me and the disruptors because they know the game, right? They know that, in a certain regard, you can kind of ride it out. You know what I mean? Like, it was like, oh, we're going to ride this out and see how long. And some people did. Some people had to leave, and some people are still riding out. And some people are going to win that piece on their own path. Do you know what I mean? Like the world is changing around them, the school is changing around them, but maybe they're not, But yeah, some people moved on. Did people kind of say like, yeah, I'm with the racism shit, so I'm leaving? No, that's not what happened. That's not how it went down, right? People moved on in some ways, and obviously they're not gonna tell me like, yeah, you won, Joe. I'm going to the racist school now. Like that's not how it went down. But I imagine, yes, whether that's not to say I'm a racist, but it's kind of just say like I'm just not trying to reflect as much of my practice. I'm just not trying to change as much, or I'm not trying to be this student centered, or I'm not trying to change my craft this much. So for sure,
Yeah, because as you're talking about this, right? Like in order for us as Black educators to stay in this construct, to stay in the K-12 school system, particularly a public school district, we have to have some navigational capital. We have to have some in order to stay here. So there are certain things that we might want to say right now, but we have to reserve for later just to still be in the game and to still be able to be in service to our students, particularly those of color. So as a school leader, and this is something that I've thought about more and more now that I'm not like in the classroom currently, how can we as school leaders and educators have long-term stability in this system without succumbing to racial battle fatigue? Because if we're doing this revolutionary work, we're going to experience racial battle fatigue. There's no way around it, because there'll be people that are going to piss us off, that they're going to say the wrong things at the wrong time, and yet we have to make a decision. Are we going to show tact and just kind of gloss over it, or are we going to just keep it real and be like, nah, this is not how it's going to go? Like really thinking about how we're going to respond in those situations. So I'm curious, like, how do you do it as a school leader in a school where that some of these things are taking place?
Yeah. I miss it. That's always a question, man. Sustainability is it. Whether we're just talking about being in public ed, right? That's underfunded and given breadcrumbs, right, to make some lemonade right out of the lemons, right? That's just public ed. You add in brown folks, Black folks, poor folks into the situation. Yeah, we got to added burden, added obstacles. So therefore, yeah, added fatigue. And then if you're trying to fight back, additional fatigue and additional casualties there, right? So, I think you got to be super strategic, right? I mean, sometimes they say like, while everybody else is playing checkers, you playing chess. Not everybody wants to engage in that kind of work, but we're talking about battle, then we're talking about war, and we're talking about warfare, right? And warfare is not a game of checkers. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's a game of chess. Whether that is your plan, right, or your piece on somebody else's piece, or really it's like our ancestors really moving the pieces, right? And we're the pieces now, right? But this idea that like we're continuing in this long-term fight is one of it. So one of this being strategic, but however, strategic thinking could also allow us to playing small and being incremental in our work, right? And I know one of the tricks, right, the system plays on us, it gets us to think that we need to be overly strategic and overly cautious, so then it ends up being slow, so the change is minimal, right? And they're cool with that, right? Which is why when folks come around with some bold shit, like, whoa, 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 that's too much. You asked for too much there. Like, we can't do that. We can't blow it all up. You can't just hire all Black people. You know what I mean? Like, all these things, like, no, you just can't do that. Like, and we see how the reaction to bold, or just in one moment, in one meeting, just telling somebody how we 100% feel, 100%, like that alone. It's like, whoa, 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 that's too much emotion here. Come on. Seems like you're mad. I'm not even listening to what you're saying. You just mad. I'm not going to listen. Right. So I'm not going to change. I'm not going to listen. Stop talking. So that strategy, I think, is a hindrance too, right? So I think if we're going to be, the question is, how do we do that and be bold, right? That's the question, right? Not just how do we survive, right? But how do we boldly change things, right? So one, you got to have a lot of support. You got to have a lot of people. You got to have a lot of advisors, right? Like, so don't think there's no wheel that you're reinventing. You know what I mean? Like, that's why being a student of history, whether that's through the books or through learning from our people, that has to be fundamental to kind of see just what worked and what didn't work. That being said, you can't learn from the incremental change as people, right? Maybe you learn some things not to do from them, right? But this idea of seeing what's been done in the past from bold visionary people, or going next door to another school that's doing something bold and visionary, and seeing how did you do it and learning from them, as opposed to you just going to reinvent the wheel slowly, right? Two, we have to have places to go back to for refuge, right? Of whether that's people that we feel that we connect with, that are going to support us, but also push us and reinforce our bold work as well, right? Those are our homies, those are our mentors. And then I think this piece, the question also, sometimes we pose it as, what are you going to do so that you can continue to navigate this racist system, right? Where the question really is, how do we change the system, right? So that the navigation is nothing, right? And that's the thing they don't want us to be thinking about, right? So whenever people talk about job retention for Black folks, and like, what do you need to do? What do you need to do to retain our Black teachers? I was like, change the school system, that's it, right? Because they're trying to change the school system and you're not letting them, so change the school system and have their back. Be the white person that stands up and says the thing that they're about to say before they have to say it, so they don't have to say it, right? Change everything, right? Change the curriculum, change the discipline system, change who's hired, change who the bosses are, all of it, right? Like, that's how we navigate this, right? So the same thing of, like, to say, like, in a school approach, sometimes I get this kid who's getting kicked out of class all the time. So we said, what are we going to do with this kid always getting kicked out of class? He's not achieving, not doing well. Oh, give him a counselor. Give him a social worker. Oh, give him a therapist, outside therapist. Oh, put him in special ed. But what we're not changing for that kid is that antecedent, right? That initial piece. What is triggering the student outside of society and decades of racism and classism, right? But we're talking about just in the space. Change the space, so that way they don't need to get kicked out of the space. They don't want to leave the space because the space is what they want it to be, right? So the same thinking can be applied to the whole school system, right? Which really goes to centering the folks who are being marginalized, right? Black people, brown people, poor people, immigrant people. If we're at the center, we're at the center. Then it's the other folks, right? Now we get to what you were saying, right? Of like, people, oh, did you leave the school after you started talking about that stuff? Because what I've seen in some of the trainings, as talking about the trainings I do outside of my school, is some folks get to the place where they're like a white teacher may say, well, should I even be in this school for Black children? That's the question they need to be wrestling with, as opposed to, do we belong there, right? We often are the ones feeling the imposter syndrome, right? In all these spaces, right? They feel comfortable. They feel quite comfortable, right? But this idea of saying, like, damn, maybe I don't have all the answers. Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe I should rethink what I'm doing. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that's the yes or no is the answer, but think about that shit, right? But it's until we get to the place where these folks who have been winning and centered and supreme have to be destabilized and uncomfortable enough to reflect and change their actions, we ain't there yet, right? So really, this whole educational system tear down and rebuild, right? Bettina Love says this all the time beautifully, right? And folks before her as well. But tear it down and build it with us at the center. Let's be unapologetic about that, and then let's let the white folks sort that out afterwards, you know?
Right. And I think what you described there is really the difference between performative allyship and then getting to a place where we're active co-conspirators in this space. Because like right now, we're beyond the, let's go ahead and start these book clubs. Because there's so many books out there that talk about what we're talking about today. There's so many people who can give you knowledge about this, but in the end, what are you doing to ensure that there's systemic change within your respective school communities?
Yeah.
Like that's the place that we have to get to. And, we have so much going on. And I know you've been hearing a lot of talks about critical race theory and just the total opposition from mostly the Republicans with regard to it. And what's amazing about it is critical race theory is not something that we do in K-12 schools. Like, this is graduate level work. This is stuff that you learn when you get to that level. But yet, you got a lot of these Republicans shutting it down, outlawing it, when it's not even there to begin with. So I'm wondering, as someone who is a student of critical race theory, what are your thoughts, first off, and in what ways can we at least try to integrate those tenets of the theory into our curricula?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think they don't understand it enough to know that it's not even happening. I mean, that's that. They don't know what to talk about. But what they do know is that we're getting close. Okay. Right. And that's what it is, right? They know, right? They could feel it, right? They know, like, oh shit. They start. I mean, they're like, what year? 2020. They're like 80 years late, though. You know what I mean? They're like 100 years late, right? It's just like we've been doing this in lots of places before. They weren't sanctioned and weren't formal spaces, right? Then it became formal. Then the 60s came, and we started doing it in some other places. Then the 90s came, we started doing some other places. So they're hella late, right? These books, we're not reading all books from this year, right? Like Paulo Freire was written in the 60s, right? So part of it is they know that it's coming, right? And they know, they've seen the power of folks who've been, who've learned, who've read and been a student of history, right? And learn these sociological frameworks, right? That they know, and they know they can't argue it once they know it, right? Which is why when you ask people to define it, they don't even know enough, because they just know, like, we just can't let this happen. Because it's going to take our power away. Makes me feel bad, makes me have to reflect about myself. They don't want none of that. Now, of course, it's happening in with the young people, because critical race theory just says we need to have a critical study of history, right? And an honest examination to see where power dynamics, specifically racial power dynamics, lie, right? And right, it says that we need to be using counter narratives to fight against the dominant narrative of white supremacy, right? But that alone forces white folks to have to wrestle with this idea of, like, oh shit, what you mean it's been dominant? But I know it's dominant. Back to the invisibility of whiteness and white privilege, right? So they know that, but they're trying to stay in the dark and pretend like they don't know for as long as they can. So ethnic studies is critical race theory, right? And it's not, that's the wrong thing to say. Ethnic studies is a curricular and more of a curricular approach to using critical race theory as an approach to education. Okay. We're not teaching critical race theory. And now some places they are, right? I do know there are some places they're teaching kids critical race theory, just like they're teaching kids sociology, right? They're young people who understand the term hegemony, right? Who understand the term social reproduction, right? As they should, right? Both in term and, we knew it before we knew it, just because we understood, like, oh, you're trying to get me to be like you so that we can keep doing you, right? Like that's social reproduction. We just know it's a term, even as kids. That being said, some kids are learning this, right? But kids learning their own history, that's an influence of critical race theory, right? Let's be real, right? Flipping the power dynamics, whether that's like restorative justice or group work and collaboration in the classroom, that's an influence of critical race theory as well, right? It's also an influence of fucking loving children and loving learning, right? We're not having that conversation either because whatever people want to get caught up on these terms. But yeah, I mean everywhere, right? But like fundamentally learning history, but then also teaching these history stories of both of oppression, right? The truth, and also resistance and liberation, right? Teaching those stories and what were they being oppressed for? Who were they being oppressed by? Right? What did they fight back against? What were they trying to demand in that process? What did they win? That's critical race theory, right? That's why they don't want to study in that stuff, right? They'd rather us just study, well, we fought against Vietnam and we won. We fought against Russia and we won because we're the best, right? That's the only power dynamics that we normally want to promote, right? But this idea of these other dynamics, obviously don't want to promote it because once we learn this stuff, we're going to ask why we haven't gotten it before, and we're going to want our check. We're going to want our receipt. We're going to look at the receipts and be like, you've been holding out on this whole time. Where's the rest of my money at? And I should have access to these things. And that's what we know. That's power, right? I mean, yeah, that's power and control, right? Which is why folks want to control the schools and make sure they teach us a more subservient approach to being, right? Whether we're white or black, but especially if we're black, right?
Oh, for sure. And got one more question before we get to the lightning round. So I know that we have the Dismantling White Supremacy Conference coming up. And man, you got some heavy hitters here. Man, you got what? Dr. Goli Muhammad, Dr. Ibram Kendi, Dr. Bettina Love, Carla España, and Dr. Luz Herrera. The list goes on and on. Like, these are folks in this space who are doing some phenomenal work. So these aren't just like, yeah, you gotta talk to me about this conference, bro, and how you were able to get this together, and what are some things that people can take away from this conference, because this is very revolutionary what you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate that, man. I'm so excited, you know, like every day I wake up and it feels like it's a dream, you know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, this came out of my work with my school originally, and the work I did as a teacher before that, and my lived experience in this country, right? But at a certain point, I was like, man, I want to write about this. When I started writing and doing articles and stuff, then I was like, man, you know, maybe I'll give them some workshops, you know. And I did an hour-and-a-half workshop about 2 years ago, well, two years plus, down in San Diego, and I saw how the folks engage with the process outside of my school. And I saw how activated they were and how interested they were. And I was like, oh, this is it. You know what I mean? I was like, it's an hour and a half. They say, this is nothing. So I turned into a full day training, same June, we'll be in May. So almost 2 years ago, right? A month from now. And I did a full day training, and folks from around the country flew in, and still in person in 2019. And then I was like, this is all I want to do, period. Right. I was like, and one day is not enough time. Did it again a couple times the following year. Pandemic hits, and this is a crazy story. So pandemic hits. I had planned to do a summer training in person. Pandemic hits. I'm like, man, I guess I'll see what's up with this virtual stuff. You know, like this is the beginning of the pandemic last year, and I said, okay, I'm gonna put it out there and see what's going on. And then people start signing up. And when I did it, I thought I had like, I don't know, 30, 40 people or something like that. I had like 20, 30, 40 people in the past, and people signing up. And I got this one day where I got like 20 people signed up, and I was joking with my wife, and I was like, man, somebody's over here pranking me. Like, they were pranking me, right? And I was like, 20 people did not sign up for this workshop. And I looked, and I was like, oh, this is real. I was like, and sign up. And then the summer hits, right? Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, right? Ahmaud Arbery, right? White people waking up, hitting the streets. And man, I got to tell you, last summer, this is, I did one in June, a virtual training. I had days where 100 people a day were signing up. And I ended up doing a training last year in the summer in June, with 950 people in a Zoom from across the country for 4.5 hours on a Saturday, 4.5 hours on a Sunday last June. And going up to that, I ran out of room. I found out that Zoom only fits 1,000 people. I had no idea Zoom was new. I was like, and I look at it, I was like, oh, and I had to send an email to people. I was like, look, we full. I was like, we got to do another one. So I planned another one in July, did the whole thing. And we had people from like 8-9 countries. I don't know, 40 of the 50 states. Did another one in July after the one in June. Again, with like 800 people in it. In a Zoom. And we're doing a 9-hour training last summer. And then from that, the rest of the year was a whole bunch of other stuff like year-long courses and trainings and whatever after that. Then I get to this point, and the whole time all year people are like, Joe, when is part 2? Because at this point I done trained 2,500, 3,000 people just in the part 1 series, right? And they're like, where is the part? You're doing all these other workshops. When is part 2? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, well, it took me a whole year to kind of figure out what is part 2. And what I arrived at was obviously anti-racism, and this idea of putting anti-racism into practice and policy, and answering this question of, okay, cool, your ideas are cool, great, you got some books, some new vocabulary words, but what are you doing? And what are you changing, right? So part 2 picks up where it is putting anti-racism into policy and practice and entertaining those ideas. So then once I had that idea, I started putting out the feelers of people, and I started building, got my homies on board, reached out to Patina and Goldie and Kendi's people, and they were with it. And I was like, okay, this is happening. And, now we're at the place where we had like 350 people registered already, and it's still a month away. So it's a week long. Obviously, those 3 keynotes, I'm doing about 5 hours on Monday or Tuesday, then another 4-hour session on Wednesday with everybody. And then on Thursday, Friday, they get to pick between 8 workshops so far with some of the people you talked about, other people like my homie Michael Essien and Shane Saphir and my homies Jen and Jose. Everyone's doing something, right? Because I'm trying to answer this question of how do you do it in discipline? How do you do it with your data? How do you do it in decolonizing the curriculum, right? To give people just some resources with the experts who know their stuff. I know some of my stuff, and everybody knows their stuff. So it's going to be a week-long conference, and all of a sudden it's a conference. And went from like, a blog post, you know what I mean, to like week-long of hopefully what'll be something amazing,
And I'm assuming that this is stuff that you hope that you can do annually.
Yeah, brother. At this point,
yeah,
that's the goal for the foreseeable future. It's going to be an annual Dismantling White Supremacy Culture in Schools conference. Maybe in person one day,
Yeah, man. More power to you. As someone that just organized a whole summit and conference, I know how much work that is. That's a lot of work, bro. So I definitely commend you for even doing all this. So we are at the lightning round. So I have a few quick hitter questions to close us out. With all the work you're doing, brother, how do you take care of yourself? What's your favorite self-care activity right now?
Well, it used to be when I had time. When I had time, ideally, I would love to be hooping or taking a hike, right? Or writing some rhymes and recording some rhymes, taking a trip. But, with kids and 2 jobs, I don't really have a lot of time. So, every now and then I get a little time for myself. So last night I took a late night walk. You get old, you just like, you turn into old man, just like, what, ain't nothing like a late night walk on a cold night. You know what I mean? Like listening to some music, you know what I mean? So like truthfully like that. And, yeah, I'm in a moment of grinding right now, though. I'm not really in a moment of self-care. That's going to come later. But I've been grinding kind of hard recently.
No, I see that. Okay, you writing bars. Oh, okay. Let me find
once upon
out.
a time. Once upon a time. I don't tell people where to find that. I say search to see what you find, but once upon a time, there's some stuff out there somewhere.
All right, man. I'm at to do my investigative work then. All right. A book that you're currently reading right now, and it doesn't have to be educational based. It could be leisure if you have a book that's for that purpose.
Yeah, I don't really read for leisure. It's been a while. But I'm revisiting How to Be an Anti-Racist, and a new book that I'm getting into is called My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Minikim.
Yep. My wife read that. She loved it.
That brother, man. He's on some other stuff that like we're just getting to, right? Like, yeah, I mean, he's a visionary on a lot of levels. Yeah, that work is amazing because it's by a Black person.
Yep.
Separating the content and the message for white people, Black people, and specifically police officers, which is an interesting distinction in making all this conversation, and the effects of trauma on the body. I mean, all kind of stuff. So that book, that's the book right there.
Yeah, and you also have to do his training too, Resma's training, because he has a training that's pretty much based off of that entire book. And my wife went through it for a weekend, and man, she loved it. She loved it.
Yeah, believe that.
So definitely a good book. So I know you have your third born that just came very recently. So
about to in about a month and a half.
About a month and a half. Well, when it does happen, I mean, just talk me about fatherhood, man. Like, how you feel about fatherhood right now with the third one on the way?
It's beautiful, man. It's what we're here for, you know. I understand that everybody can't have children for different reasons, but if you can, right, it's a beautiful thing, right? And who cares what you think about yourself and all these accolades and resume, all that shit. It don't matter. What matters is what are we leaving for the future, whether that's your own blood or just the generations ahead, right? It's beautiful. There's no perspective like your own children to humble you, to recenter you, to focus you, to get you to balance, keep you honest, right? Teach you about yourself, and give you that drive, Yeah, it's beautiful. It's hard as hell. Ain't nothing harder than it, but it's beautiful.
Nah, you're not lying about that. We have a 3-year-old son, and he just wants to run around, eat, play with his toys and Legos, and that's it, man. The expectations are pretty low at this age. Expectations are low, so. So I know you love basketball. I got my Kobe jersey on because Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame, I noticed.
You know what I mean? Got my Kobe jersey, so that's my guy. So I don't know. Being from the Bay Area, have you I don't know if you're a Warriors fan. Like, do you have a team you root for?
I mean, I like a lot of basketball. I think I've never really been so tied. Some people I just feel like when you're kind of like I'm just with one team, you're missing out on a whole lot of goodness is out there. I played basketball as a kid. Very badly on a team in high school. Somewhat a little bit better as a college student for fun. But I just love hoops, man. I love the magic of that, right? The things that are once again genius, right? The things folks can do about their minds, right, are genius and beautiful to watch. Yeah, man. Yeah, of course, I love the Warriors being here. It's nice that we had a run at a dynasty as well. But I just love amazing players, man. For me, I can't sleep on how amazing and impactful LeBron is.
Yes.
Athletics, period. Just athletics, of course, right? And there's a lot of great athletes, right? But then you add in the business piece and the piece of no, I'm not just going to be broke and I'm not just going to get used by the system, right? On his Jay-Z type shit of I'm going to acquire wealth as well, especially coming from being poor. That I appreciate that. Then you add the social consciousness on it, right? To be fearless in that regard, to be I'm going to tell you what it is and use my platform again to push, right? And also inspire folks. So for me, I love everything that LeBron kind of stands for, and obviously his game, but it's great athletes. I mean, we'll never see anything like Steph Curry again. The purity of his shooting, it's You can't show me no footage of nothing in the past. Yes, Reggie Miller, cool. Yes, I don't know, Larry Bird. I don't know. Show me that footage. I ain't seen that. They talk about him like that. But you will never see anything like that. It's amazing. And you know how hard it is if you try to play hoops. You know
it's hard. No, it's hard. And what's funny is I grew up watching his father play, Dell.
Yeah.
All those years with the Hornets, and I thought, man, he's really a good shooter. And then I see Steph come up. I'm like, dang, you blow your father out the water. And your father was a really good shooter, growing up. But yeah, you're definitely right. So, who do you have winning the title, and also who's your MVP?
For MVP, I gotta say Steph. Even I love betting on people that's just killing it. Even though, like, who cares if you got a winning year or not, man? The best is the best. Period. Dame is incredible too, man. Dame is incredible too. But Steph is doing some stuff, man, right now. Who to win it? I don't know. It's a weird year, man, with these injuries and these weird teams coming out of nowhere. And like, you already know that, like, who cares if you came out and you were top 2, 3, or 1? Like, you get eat up in the playoffs. Obviously, your team can't do nothing. So I don't know, man. I'm gonna go with the Lakers, man, just because I want to see it. But I got no idea what's gonna happen.
Yeah, you thinking Lakers? I mean, they about to be in the playing tournament, man. Like, with all the injuries they've had with LeBron and AD.
Might come together, man. I don't know. That brother is
I mean,
he's done it all times but once.
Yeah, I'm not gonna bet against them. But I'm just saying, if they come across the Warriors and you just describe what Steph is doing, all they need is one game. One game.
I know. Like, who knows? That's why you don't know. It's a toss-up, man.
Yeah, it's a weird season. All right. If you can invite 3 figures to dinner, dead or alive, who would they be?
Malcolm, number 1. I would love to have a conversation with there's a person in history is kind of a going into crates named Imhotep, one of the original scientists of Egypt, right? The building of the step pyramid.
Good choice.
And I think I'd love to have a conversation with Asada.
Asada Shakur.
Yeah, that's my picks.
Same, make you always go to Cuba, see if you can
hit.
You know.
You never know. No doubt.
Yeah, and then last question: who would you like to see as a guest on this podcast?
Oh man. I think you should interview Resma. Actually, we're just talking about Resma. He's just amazing, real inspiring.
Yeah, sometimes there are folks that are hard to come by, but
yeah, I'm sure. Never know.
We'll see. Who knows? Might get lucky. But Joe, man, thank you so much for taking this time to talk with a brother. Like I said in the beginning, you're doing some revolutionary work, and it's going to pay dividends, in the end. Like, this is the work that we just need to have going on, and you're inspiring a lot of people out here, man. So
appreciate that, man. Appreciate you as well, doing the work you're doing and just spreading people's stories, man. That's powerful. People need to hear them.
Yeah, but it's just a small piece of what we got to do, man. So much more that has to happen. But before you leave, let people know about Truss Leadership, man. Let them know how they can follow you on social media so they can support what you're doing. And also let them know about the Dismantling White Supremacy Conference, because we're trying to get these numbers up.
Yeah. Appreciate that. So you can find like my info at trustleadership.com. Same. You can also get there by joetruss.com. And that's my business, my consulting work, my blogs on there. Everything, the courses I teach, the workshops I do, a lot of resources. You can find me on Twitter at Truss Leadership, and Instagram also at Truss Leadership. And the workshop conference this summer, you can get to that same website, but you can also get to it directly at dismantlewsc.com. And that's everything. Sign up, tickets, videos, plenty of info there. Dismantlewsc.com.
And there you have it, folks. So make sure y'all register. Sure, I might need to register myself. All these folks got up here, man. I'll be a fool not to register.
Yeah, it's gonna be good.
Yes, sir. But man, Joe, man, I appreciate you. And I want to make sure that you can get to your family so you can enjoy the rest of your day. But thank you, brother, and hopefully we'll connect soon.
Yeah, no doubt, brother Kwame. Appreciate it.
All right.
Good luck with everything, brother.
Man, I appreciate you. Take care.
All right.
All right, peace. All right, good people. So we're about to end another episode of IDTALK for Educators Live. And please make sure you sign up and register for the Dismantling White Supremacy Conference coming up in June. It's going to be phenomenal. You heard some of the speakers and presenters who will be there. And this is what's going to help change our school systems, y'all. So let's make sure that we support that. But until next time, people, I wish you all a good morning, a good night, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.